Welcome, everyone. Happy Friday. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Ozzy Arroyo, he, him pronouns, and I am a program officer with the Passport team at College Success Foundation. I'm excited to have everyone here today to hear from our two speakers, one of our partners at WSAC and CSF's own Director of Government Affairs and Advocacy. We will go ahead and get started here. So, yeah, you'll be hearing a little bit about highlights from this year's legislative session, as well as some important updates. Um, Before we get started, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our WPN YouTube channel and as well as the WPN website. As soon as we have the recording ready, we'll be sending out an email with the direct link to the recording for everyone who registered, not just those in attendance today. And then this meeting format is intentional to encourage questions and participation. So if at any point you have any questions or any comments, feel free to raise your hand or submit a question in the chat, and we will get it answered as soon as possible. And now I will go ahead and hand it off to today's speakers, Joel and Yokiko. Welcome.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ozzy. Good morning, everyone. Super nice to be in this space with you. I know I've met a couple of folks in the room, but many folks I have not. So very briefly, again, my name is Joel Anderson. I use he, him pronouns. I lead our external relations and legislative work at the Washington Student Achievement Council, and am really grateful for our partnership with College Success Foundation, the Passport Network, and all of the students that you all serve. Looking forward to talking more about the legislative session today with you all, and I'll turn it over to Yokiko.
Thank you, Joel, and thank you, Ozzy, for facilitating and kind of keeping everybody in line. I mean, everybody is me. Happy Friday, late morning, almost lunchtime. My name is Yokiko Hayashi-Saguil. I use she, her pronouns, and I am excited to be a team member at the College Success Foundation, working as the government relations director and advocacy part of my work, but thrilled to be here with you all. I've previously worked at WSAC, worked at the State Board for Community and Technical Colleges, and anytime I get to combine my favorite things all together, supporting students, talking about access and financial aid, and then sort of how the sausage gets made. It's a really great day. So I'm grateful to have this space with you all and to kind of run through a few things. So we'll go over our agenda, which we'll talk about what we're going to go over today. So we'll just do a very high level overview of what is the legislative session, some highlights from this year, a little bit of a bill watch. So we can talk about bills that passed, bills that didn't, what do they do, how does that impact our work together, and what does that mean we should be mindful of, and what should we be considering in the future. And then we will talk a little bit or save some space to talk about the budget, and then go into, now that we know all of these things, what does that mean for advocacy, and specifically what does that mean for us as a partnership and leadership network in supporting students in care or who are at risk of homelessness or experiencing homelessness. So mostly just to kind of get your feet planted if you've never talked about the legislative session before, and then hopefully make you feel a bit more confident to ask more questions and to get involved. So we'll get started. A very quick high-level overview is, so under the Washington State Constitution, the legislature meets every year, and they start on the second Monday in January. We are on a biennial cycle, which means that it is 2 years for our fiscal cycle, and that means that our legislative session operates on either a short or long session. The long session is on odd number years, so this year in 2025 we had a long session of 105 days, and then next year in 26 it will be a short session of 60 days. What's important to keep in mind is that our legislature is a part-time legislature, which means that those House of Representatives and senators for our state are either doing other work while they are actively serving in the legislature, but they're only doing it for this window of time when they're coming together as a body to make decisions about what we're doing in the future of Washington State. And so it is kind of like a flurry of things that happen, and the long sessions can sometimes feel like epically long, and the short sessions can also feel just as long, even though it's about 40 days shorter. And I put in here, we had the first day of session this year was January 13th, and it did end on April 27th, which is this past Sunday. We anticipated that there was potential for a special session given the nature of this year's budget, and we have a new governor, and there's a handful of things that are a little bit different this year. But I think it was really important for us to kind of keep in mind that that means that there was always a potential for us to come back together and maybe continue to see things hash out between our representatives and our senators and the governor. We have 49 legislative districts across our state, and we have two chambers. The upper chamber is the Senate, and the lower chamber is the House of Representatives. So we have one senator per or regional district, and then we have two representatives for each one. So I'll stop there. Are there any questions about what I just shared? Because it's pretty straightforward. It's short or long. Part-time legislators, they run every, I think our senators run on a 4-year cycle, representatives are a 2-year cycle. So that's one thing to keep in mind, that upper and lower chamber. All right, let's keep moving. So what's important to think about is, well, how does this legislative session, what does that mean to Passport and really to all entities within supporting students, college access, ensuring high school completion and things like that? How does that impact this network? It does quite a bit. And so we have a very important partnership with the Student Achievement Council, where we work collectively and collaboratively in ensuring that information, resources, training, work together. And that means that we are trying to be aligned in our goals and what we advocate for during the legislative session. And in terms of what that means for the College Success Foundation as a nonprofit, we have a little bit of flexibility in terms of how we lobby, how we engage in legislative advocacy. On behalf of our partnership with WSAC as a agency, they operate a little bit differently, and they're not able to lobby on things that sit outside of their requests. And if you need more details, Joel, I'm sure would be happy to give you the run through of how that works. But important that this partnership is a public-private partnership because it is in benefit to the students that are served and the collective network of professionals that engage in ensuring that students have what they need. So our collective priorities are college access and completion, ensuring students have the capacity, training, resources, information that they need, thinking about the different supports that come in. So whether that's academic, that could be connecting students to different basic needs, food, housing, those types of things. Those are also very critical to our mission and vision. And then, of course, as I said before, continuing that public-private partnership, because that is kind of the bread and butter of what makes so many service industries so successful, is that it is in partnership between the state government and the different nonprofit or community-based organizations that enable community outreach and engagement. So that way services are administered and provided in the ways that they need to be done. For our legislative request this year, we were looking to continue program funding, a reinstatement or sort of revisiting the increased ask for the Passport program with WSAC as our partner in that contract to kind of meet the needs of the increased population that we serve. We also looked at increasing support for our career and workforce education partnership and rural programming. So that's kind of some of the bigger items included with Passport that CSF was lobbying for. And mostly it's about creating systems and support networks that align with engaging students at meaningful touch points along every part of their college access journey, and ensuring that the legislature understands just how critical the services and staffing that we have is to providing that enhances what happens at the schools, what happens with our partners at the district, what happens when students enter into post-secondary. So kind of really aligning all of those pieces, because college access and information doesn't just have one place, it's an iterative place with a long journey. So that wraps up that slide. Any questions on the information I shared there? All right, seeing none, we'll keep moving.
Awesome. Thanks again, Yokiko, for that overview. I'm going to be sharing more about some legislation that passed this session, as well as some legislation that did not, and then a couple items related to the budget. And I will do my best to pause, of course, for questions, because I think some of this is going to get a little bit into the weeds, but I think it'll be really important to share more about, just so we're all on kind of the same page for the students that are served by Passport. So we're going to start off with a couple of bills that impacts actually really one bill in particular that will impact Passport youth, and then we'll move on to some other relevant legislation, and then again finish off with a couple budget items. So thanks, Ozzy, for switching the slide. I also want to again encourage questions. I can't always see the chat immediately, but I am going to be sharing a couple of links as we talk through this content, just to kind of supplement what you see on your screen. The first of which I will send now. What I'm sharing in the chat is a link to the income eligibility levels for the Washington College Grant and the College Bound Scholarship heading into the 25-26 academic year. So that chart looks like a lot of numbers. I promise I will boil it down to the best extent possible. But if you leave this webinar with anything today, I hope it is an understanding of Senate Bill 5785. This bill was introduced, unfortunately, like much legislation this session, as a cost-saving measure. For those who maybe had not heard previously, the legislature was facing a significant budget deficit this session. Over the next 4 years, our state was in the hole about $16 billion. And if you heard billion with a B, that is absolutely right. It is very, very significant and produced a really difficult session, I know, for myself, for Yokiko, for everybody who was on the ground in Olympia. And so as a result, we did see some changes to the awards for both the Washington College Grant and again, the College Bound Scholarship Program. This first slide around 5785 is meant to summarize kind of what we're seeing in terms of income eligibility thresholds. So as a quick refresher, you can qualify for the Washington College Grant as long as your family is making under 100% of our state's median family income and you do not have a bachelor's degree. And as you get below 100% of MFI, that translates to a different award amount. So as you'll see on the chart in front of you, this legislation established new thresholds starting next academic year, 25-26. And moving forward, any student from a household that is in the 0 to 60 MFI range will be eligible for a full college grant award, which is 100% of public tuition and fees. I've included some income guidelines on the right-hand side as well from the chart linked in the chat, so you can kind of link that information together. But just to kind of put it out into the open, again, a family of 4 making $78,500 a year or less is eligible for full tuition and fees. So that means, just as a couple of frames of reference, any student you serve who's using SNAP or nutrition assistance benefits, they are eligible for full tuition and fees. We also know that students getting Passport, virtually across our state, almost every single student on Passport is receiving a maximum Washington College Grant Award. So it's kind of nice that those things already overlap and we know that our students are getting that aid. But important to know how these thresholds have changed. To Nat's question in the chat about what it was previously, it is a little bit of a double-edged sword here. So in recent years, the legislature has modified these thresholds using temporary language in the state budget. So it has not been like, oh, it's going to be 0 to 60 MFI for forever. It's been, the range will be this number this year, it'll go up next year, it'll go up the year after. The situation we found ourselves in this legislative session was that for the current academic year, 24-25, the threshold to get a full college grant award was actually 65% median family income. And without any action taken by the legislature, it would have dropped next year to 55%. So while the percentage is technically dropping from 65 to 60, it could have dropped even further to 55. I will also note that because these income levels you see on the right-hand side do increase every year, the actual income for a family of 4 this school year that is equivalent to 65 MFI is the same number that's equivalent to 60 MFI next year. So a family who's making 78.5 this year and next year will still be getting the same award. But technically those thresholds by median family income are changing. I will also note that these thresholds have changed a little bit as you go down the chart. So previously we had awards that were just 100%, 50%, 24.5%, or 10% of public tuition and fees. Starting next year, there is going to be an additional level of a 60% award for that small range of students who fall between 61 and 65% median family income. But again, the incomes on the right-hand side are just meant to be a reference point, and the full chart in the chat does show incomes, I believe, for up to a household of 20 maybe or so. So if you're working with students who have larger households, smaller households, and you want to know how these income levels compare, I really encourage you to point to that chart. I know my colleagues, Carla and Dawn, are on this call too, and they are more than happy, I'm sure, to help folks with understanding these award levels. And Misty, to your question about when schools can expect the updated awarding charts, I unfortunately do not have that answer. But again, I know some of my colleagues from Student Financial Assistance are on the call today. And so if one of them would be able to chime in or has additional knowledge on when that will be sent out, that would be awesome. But the chart I shared in the chat, it is public. It is on our website. And so for now, I think that direct link would be great. With that being said, Ozzy, if you could head over to the next slide, that would be great. Thanks. And this one similarly is a little in the weeds, but it is about the same legislation. So I wanted to make sure that I had another reference point in the chat for you all. What I'm sharing in the chat is a list of all schools that participate in state financial aid programs through WSAC. So these are public institutions, private institutions, both not-for-profit and for-profit. That also includes Western Governors University, or WGU Washington, and then apprentices. In addition to what we saw through 5785 in terms of how the income levels change, we are also seeing award amounts change for basically all institutions that are not public. So for the students you serve who go to a public 4-year like University of Washington, or a public 2-year like Tacoma Community College, I'm biased, I'm from Tacoma, but there are many beautiful CTCs across the state. Those awards are not changing. But we are seeing, again, impacts to our other sectors. And so I'll kind of walk through this chart. And again, I recognize this is a lot of information, so I will pause after this slide or throughout and answer further questions. But starting with our private 4-year not-for-profit schools, these are institutions largely associated with the independent colleges of Washington. So thinking about institutions like Seattle University, Pacific Lutheran University, University of Puget Sound, the list goes on. They are facing a pretty significant impact to their awards. And as I mentioned, almost all Passport students in our state are receiving the maximum college grant. And so I think that these impacts for our students who are not at public institutions are absolutely going to be felt. They do not take effect next year. Starting with the middle column on this table, these adjustments will take effect in the 26-27 academic year, so 2 years from now. But students going to a private 4-year not-for-profit will see their award reduced from about $9,700 to the half of the annual average of the awards given to students at UW and WSU, our 2 public research universities. The estimate for 26-27 right now is that award will be roughly $6,400 or so. So we're looking at those students facing a reduction of over $3,000 to their college grant award. Again, not next academic year, but starting in 26-27. We did not see a change to the college grant for our private 2-year not-for-profit universities, although I believe that is only one institution, Perry Technical Institute, and there might be just a couple of students there who are on Passport. And moving further down the list, for students who attend private 2- and 4-year for-profit schools, just to name a couple of those, that includes DigiPenn Institute of Technology, Northwest College of Art and Design, and Seattle Film Institute. Those awards have been removed fully from statute. I do not have the full, I don't have the existing awards on this slide, I apologize, but I know it's at least a couple $1,000s or even a few $1,000s for those institutions. But those will be ending in the 26-27 year. And then our last 2 categories for the college grant, Western Governors University did have their award reduced down to just over $4,000. And then for anyone who's participating in an apprenticeship, Their award has previously been equivalent to the award at a public community and technical colleges, so somewhere in the $4,000 range. That has now been cut in half, so closer to roughly 2,200, I want to say. And again, all of those impacts will take effect in the 26-27 year. Before I go on to the second part of this table for college bound, I just want to pause, maybe even mid-slide, and see, do you folks have questions about impacts that we're seeing to the Washington College Grant or to any of these individual sectors? Yeah, Colleen, that is a great question. So the passport award is, can be capped at $5,000. It is subject to appropriation. I will share, kind of getting ahead of myself here, but in the budget this year, we did not see any cuts to passport funding. So WSAC receives just under $7 million a year in ongoing funding for the passport program. But as many of you know in this space, the number of students being served by Passport has been increasing every year. So I know that the award this academic year was cut, I believe, from $5,000 down to a maximum of $2,800. I unfortunately do not know, with the appropriations remaining consistent and with the caseload, I imagine, continuing to increase for Passport, I am not sure what that will mean for maximum awards in 25-26, but I believe those are determined by WSAC. And again, I know my colleague Dawn is on the call. I don't know if I could phone a friend perhaps, or if she'd be willing to respond in the chat. But if there's any feedback you could provide, I would love to hear that.
Yeah, so similar to Washington College Grant, we have to wait for the governor to sign the budget. But we're again, this year we saw probably like close to another 20% increase in the number of students. And with the same amount of funding, we're expecting awards to be cut again next year. Right now, my best guess is around 2,000, although we'll get that nailed down a little bit more later on in the year and get that information out to financial aid administrators and designated support staff.
Great. Thanks. Well, not a great situation, but great that we have the information at our disposal. Thank you so much, Don. I really appreciate that. I'm happy to take further questions on the college grant, but I will just give a quick summary of college bound. The long story short is that those adjustments are largely very similar to what is happening to the Washington College Grant, but they are pushed out an additional year. So these changes would take effect in the 27-28 academic year. And for those of you who may follow the budget a bit more closely, yes, this is outside of the next 2-year budget that was just passed by the legislature. So they're kind of pushing off these cuts into the future, and we will see what that ends up turning into in the next year or two. But for now, these cuts are slated to take place during the 2027-29 biennium, as opposed to what we're entering, which is the 25-27 biennium. Awards at our private not-for-profit schools will actually be cut even greater than what is happening to the college grant. The reason for that is that college bound awards at our private 4-year not-for-profit institutions are in statute higher than the Washington College Grant. I mentioned that the existing award for the college grant has been about $9,700. For college bound eligible students, private 4-years actually get, I want to say, in the neighborhood of $12,600. So there is an additional $3,000 and change that is given to those students who are getting college bound. And so if you are a college bound student, right, who is potentially also in Passport, you are going to be looking at potentially a $6,000 cut to your award starting in the 27-28 academic year. So our students who are enrolled right now and maybe have a year left would not be experiencing that cut. But for students who are maybe new, a first-year student, these could certainly come to fruition in a couple of years. We also did see some adjustments to the other awards. So somewhat similar at the private 2-year not-for-profit range. Those awards are not really changing, but they're named in statute as the average community college award. We also saw awards removed once again for the 2- and 4-year for-profit private institutions, and then reductions as well for WGU Washington, and then apprenticeships is just part of Washington College Grant. But if there's anything to take away from this legislation and kind of this budget environment, I think it really is the changes to the income eligibility thresholds for the Washington College Grant, and then the changes to awards for the Washington College Grant and College Bound, particularly at our private four-year not-for-profit institutions and then our private for-profit institutions. I think those will be the big areas of focus. And again, want to pause and see if there are any questions about these changes before I move on to some other legislation in the higher ed space. Okay. If you have questions, again, please feel free to share them in the chat or raise your hand as you feel comfortable. Ozzy, if you'd be willing to go to the next slide, we can touch on a couple of other bills. So as you may have noticed, again, this was a really difficult session, budget-wise, legislation-wise, et cetera. And so there is not necessarily a huge list of bills that passed, but speaking from the higher education perspective, did want to highlight a couple of wins that we are excited about. The first is Senate Bill 5543, which has expanded college-bound scholarship eligibility to all GED recipients. Previously, you could only utilize the college-bound scholarship as a GED recipient if you had experienced the foster care system sometime between 7th grade and the age of 21, and that you met all other eligibility requirements. So you were income eligible, you enrolled in college bound when you were in middle school or entering high school. But this will now allow folks who have potentially not received a high school diploma and then later received a GED to still utilize their college bound benefits. And this will take effect, soon, starting next academic year. We anticipate a few hundred students across the state will benefit, although specific to the population being served in this space, I am not sure how many of those students overlap with the passport eligible population. I anticipate, though, that there are some students who would fall into this category who may be eligible for some additional funds through the college bound program. I also wanted to note House Bill 1540, which has to do with a program WSAC administers called Supporting Students Experiencing Homelessness. This allows funding for basic needs security interventions, so things like housing and food assistance, case management, and other resources, whether those are showers, lockers, emergency childcare, other needs that students have to be accommodated for on a first come, first served basis. And to date, this program has only served our public institutions, but we did pass legislation this year to allow Northwest Indian College, which is our state's one accredited tribal institution up in the Bellingham area, to participate as well. So they will start receiving a grant next year for 25-26 academic year, and then participate in the program. So again, unfortunately, I do not know the full number of students on Passport who attend Northwest Indian College, but for anyone here who may have a connection to that institution, this is now another resource that may be able to support those students if and when they are facing instances or prolonged periods of basic needs insecurity. If we could go to the next slide, Ozzy, that would be great. And then I'll pause again for questions because I know the bills, there's a lot of text on these slides. I try to avoid that, but I also wanted to get the gist out. Two other bills of note from this session. One was House Bill 1587. This is tied to the Washington State Opportunity Scholarship, which some folks here may be familiar with. It is a merit-based or kind of a partially merit-based program for students who are entering STEM fields. And there was legislation passed this session to allow local governments to essentially buy into a public-private match through the Opportunity Scholarship Program. So moving forward, local governments such as like cities, other municipalities can match up to $250,000 of their own money to receive a state match, and then offer local funds as scholarship resources to their students to be used either at community colleges or in professional technical programs. The scope of this bill is pretty small. I think that there's anticipated a couple of cities who may participate in this program for the time being. Anyone here who's familiar with Representative Berquist may know that he has worked very hard on a program called Renton Promise, which will likely take up this opportunity. So the scope of this is fairly small, but is potentially another investment for students looking for financial aid support. And then lastly, I wanted to note in terms of bills that passed, House Bill 1273. This extended a pilot program that was started a couple of years ago through our community and technical college system to improve the participation and attainment of dual credit through career and technical education in professional technical programs. This program was set to end, and so this bill again allows it to continue for at least a couple of more years, and essentially will allow community colleges and high schools and other skill centers participating to receive funding for things like aligning their curriculum to ensure that students are receiving credit for any sort of CTE dual credit courses that they're taking or other activities that they're participating in at their high school or skills center, and ensuring that those credits can then be applied to their transcript if and when they go on to post-secondary education. So with that being said, again, I do have 2 more slides about a couple bills that did not pass and then a couple items in the budget to be aware of. But I do want to pause again and see if there are any questions about a couple of these other bills that passed, not directly related to Passport, but that could potentially have an impact for students who are entering in or already in the Passport program. Okay. Ozzy, if you could move on to the next slide, that'd be great. So for bills that we celebrate that did pass, we also do have to hold some space and some time for bills that did not pass. There were, Yokiko can fact check me on this. There were so many bills that were introduced this session. I believe close to 2,000 overall. And of the 2,000, I believe a couple hundred ended up crossing the finish line. So maybe 10 to 15% of all the legislation introduced are what came across. I will pause for a second. I do see a question in the chat for the fiscal note on House Bill 1273. The last estimate for that bill was about $600,000 for the next 2 years, and that was attributed to the community and technical college system for implementing the bill. It looks like there may also be maybe some negligible costs to individual school districts, but it looks like the bulk of the cost would be with the community college system for implementation. So thanks for that question. As we talk about, again, bills that did not pass this session, we will start off with one that was quite relevant to this group, which is 5275. This bill was sponsored by Senator Nobles and would have made the Passport to Careers program an entitlement, otherwise meaning that the program would be fully funded and also have a caseload forecast associated with Passport. So as participation increases, appropriations would also have to increase to ensure that students can all receive the maximum award that they are entitled to. Unfortunately, this was a bill that WSAC actually submitted as agency request legislation back in the fall, and do want to give a huge shout out again to Carla and Dawn on this call for helping me better understand the Passport program and how to turn some of these changes into a bill. We unfortunately did not see that legislation approved in the governor's budget, and so WSAC was unable to lobby for it to the point Yokiko was sharing earlier about limitations on our advocacy work. However, Senator Noble still chose to introduce this bill as her own. And what ended up happening is that this bill was just too expensive. We produced a fiscal note, I believe somewhere in the neighborhood of $16 million for the next 2 years, with the anticipation that that fiscal note could go up in future years as we're accommodating increased caseload forecasts for Passport. And so this was a tough one. This was a bill that I will say our team worked very diligently on to draft and stakeholder. And I know we talked with potentially some folks even in this space about the impact this would have on their students and the communities that they serve. But unfortunately this year it was just deemed to be cost prohibitive because of the budget environment. And so it did not move forward. Similar concerns came up with the other 2 bills you see here. House Bill 1136 and its very, very similar version, Senate Bill 5164, would have expanded a student aid outreach pilot program to all of our educational service districts across the state. The underlying program adjusted by this bill was something that is administered by the community and technical college system for a couple ESDs in our state who have the lowest rates of FAFSA completion in all of Washington. This bill, again, would have expanded this outreach program that hires staff to go to local high schools and work with students individually and directly to file either a FAFSA or a WASFA for students who are ineligible for federal financial aid. And while this bill did not pass, we did actually see a proviso in the budget, a new appropriation to expand this program to additional educational service districts. So I believe starting next year, this will be now operational in 3 or 4 ESDs. Yokiko might know. I think it'll be 4 with the extra addition. Amazing. Great. So we are happy to see that, of course, that work is continuing. But in terms of a statewide expansion, once again, that was deemed to be unfortunately cost prohibitive. And then lastly, House Bill 1557 or Senate Bill 5308 would have established something called the Washington Guaranteed Admissions Program. Some folks here may be familiar with this program already, but it is currently administered not as a state program, but run by a group called the Council of Presidents, which represents our public four-year institutions across the state. This program essentially says that if you have a 3.0 GPA and you've met all of the high school graduation requirements, that you can receive automatic admission to many of our public four-year institutions, as well as, I believe, maybe some other participating institutions, some of our private four-years as well. But there has been interest from the legislature in codifying this program in state law to give it a little bit more, I think, infrastructure and allow it to expand and have more students be served by the program. Like you've probably guessed at this point in our presentation, this was also deemed to be cost prohibitive. There were some concerns about implementation and setting up the technology necessary to implement this program as one that was enshrined in state law. And so for the time being, it is still active. The program is not stopping or going away, but it is administered again by the Council of Presidents. And I apologize, I should have had that link up, but I will share that in the chat in just a second for folks' reference, but I do anticipate this is something that will come back in future sessions. There's been a lot of interest in the Guaranteed Admissions Program. And so again, I just put a link in the chat for folks who may not be familiar. Yeah, this was another bill again that did not quite make it across the finish line. Before I move on to my last slide, which talks about a couple items in the budget, anyone have questions about this legislation that did not pass this year, or any other bills that maybe you had heard about or been tracking this session that you have questions about? Okay. Ozzy, if you could move to the next slide, that would be great. Thanks so much. So this is my last slide before I think Yokiko and I transition to more open-ended questions, comments, feedback, etc. I also want to just acknowledge that, as we have kind of alluded to, it has been a really heavy session. I recognize that the details we've shared so far have been not all super positive, pretty negative. And so if you're, kind of hearing us share these updates and feeling sad or frustrated, upset, discouraged, glum, whatever word fits your mood for the day. I hear you. Those really resonate with me. I imagine they resonate with Yokiko as well, and a lot of our other colleagues in the government relations space. But it's been a really, really, really difficult legislative session. So just want to honor that if folks are feeling that in this space. Which leads me to the budget, which unfortunately kind of continues this trend. We did not see many new appropriations, and we did see a lot of cuts. Specifically from WSAC's perspective, I can just share broadly that we saw almost $180 million in cuts to our agency in the next 2 years. That represents about 15% of our agency's budget. And we saw multiple programs completely eliminated that we were either set to implement or already implementing. We also saw reductions to lots of other programs. And one cut that I wanted to note for this group here is that we lost about $55 million permanently, not just for this biennium, but just moving forward, for something called bridge grants. These are $500 stipends that have been awarded to maximum Washington College grant recipients. So those would be your students, again, who are 0 to 65 MFI or 0 to 60 MFI moving forward. or otherwise, I mean, essentially all passport students. These stipends have been paid out for the current academic year as well as the last 2 years. But ultimately, in an effort to prevent further cuts to the Washington College Grant, this funding was removed and kind of reintegrated into the larger Washington College Grant program itself. So those stipends will not be available in the 25-26 academic year or moving forward as well. In terms of newer appropriations that we saw that felt somewhat relevant to this group, full transparency, I did receive a note from a colleague that there was $1.5 million appropriated to maintain independent living services rates through DCYF. I know that this is an issue of importance to our youth experiencing foster care, and I do not have expertise on this subject, but wanted to make sure that this was included because I also saw it noted in last year's presentation as well. In addition to that, kind of moving back into the higher education space, we did see about $900,000 provided to the Evergreen State College to continue a program called Shelton Promise, which does help local students with not only unmet tuition and fee costs, but also with costs associated with basic needs security. And so for anyone here who may serve students attending the Evergreen State College and in Passport, this may be yet another option for them to receive some additional support. And then lastly, as I had mentioned, we did see some money go toward expanding that student aid outreach and completion pilot to a new ESD. So that would be North Central ESD 171. And again, that money is being administered by the State Board for Community and Technical Colleges. So again, that is sort of a quick wrap. There's a lot more. And to Nat's point in the chat, yes, I did say $180 million. I will caveat that some of that money was not yet in play. The largest chunk of funding we saw removed was, or I should say the largest chunk of active money, you could say, was bridge grants. But we had about $90 million in an account to run a Washington student loan program for students entering graduate degree programs. This would have allowed students to take out low interest loans in order to pursue graduate education in specific fields that have shortages of workers right now. So things like healthcare, social work, things like that. And unfortunately, that entire account was wiped out by the state. And those funds were directed elsewhere. So you take 90 million there, 55 million from bridge grants, you're already at 145. And then we saw some other cuts to, things like our aid for healthcare workers, our aid for National Guard members, some of the funding that we received for career connected learning grants. All of those things and more were cut. And I know that we are not alone in that space. All of our public four-year institutions are facing a 1.5% cut across the board, just in kind of general spending, as well as other cuts to individual programs and initiatives that they're running. So yeah, it was quite difficult. And honestly, a lot of it was sort of out of our control too. So as someone myself who can tend to be a little type A, it is a hard situation and environment to navigate. But to clarify, yes, the number I shared was correct. So on that really, really, really cheerful note, I know that this is our last slide for budget and legislation. Ozzy, if you could move ahead to questions and comments, that would be great. But before we kind of open the floor, I did want to pause and Yokiko, see if you had any other kind of just general thoughts on session that you wanted to share.
Yeah, I think, this year presented a unique sort of like confluence of things coming together. There is the budget shortfall. There is always new members of the legislature coming together. And then, of course, for the first time in 12 years, we have a new governor. And so all of these things colliding, as we also have a new federal administration, kind of made for a unique opportunity for us to explore what is this session going to offer us. And it was grueling, it was long. And to say that it was difficult, I think, is probably underselling it a little bit. And I will speak to the fact that you are going to start to see devastating impacts from the reductions that came from the budget if it is signed by the governor, in particular to community-based organizations and nonprofits in higher ed or services areas, and this is not unique to higher ed, the reductions made across to meet the shortfall, in some cases were just huge areas that were just completely eliminated from the budget altogether. And so CSF is not immune to that. And many of our counterparts, I know that Treehouse was also included with some significant and devastating budget reductions. So we are in community with many other organizations that are learning just how significant the reductions are, as well as our counterparts at the agencies. You know, we met with Joel and a couple of other folks from WSAC earlier this week as teams are still trying to figure out what's included and what's not. And so the mad dash to get us to sine die on April 27th to close out session meant that things sort of closed out just as quickly as they start. But that means that everybody's now combing through an enormous bill to try to figure out what's there and what's not and checking in with each other. So this is not to be a sort of wet blanket on your day, but I do think it's really important for you all to anticipate that what you're going to start to hear is just how many services, how many community-based organizations, how many nonprofits are going to have to start making significant adjustments to either the services that they have, the staffing that they have available, the regions that they support, and the partnerships that they have moving into the new fiscal year, because things that were in place for many, many years are no longer in place. And we are looking at a rollback of progressive investments into higher education and education as a whole. In some cases, it's 10 years, in other places, it's nearly 20. And so Washington State's investment into these initiatives has been severely impacted. And that's also not considering we don't quite know just what's going to come from the federal government. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind as we're still kind of figuring out what exactly that means. And it's okay to have questions. It's okay to be a little bit confused and also just concerned about what's coming next. I also think it's important to call out that for any of the bills that were introduced this session, if it did not make it through, well, it's automatically included in the next year, because bills introduced in the first year of the biennium will be revisited in the second year if it doesn't pass. So you'll see all of those bills proposed will kind of come back. They'll be sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? It'll be brought back to life. It'll be given a little bit of a shocker to come right back and given a defibrillator. That's what I'm thinking about. So it comes back to life and they review, and we'll see how it goes. In terms of next session being a short year session of 60 days, we will see what happens in the supplemental budget and we will see how things move going forward. But I think that we are in what I hate to say as a millennial, unprecedented times, but we're in a very unique circumstance. So I think it's important for us to be mindful that the legislative process will happen again. The fiscal year starts in July, and I know that some of y'all are also working with the federal fiscal year, which starts differently, and then the academic year starts at a different time. So we've got a handful of things that are circulating always, but just know that if you have somebody that's been working in government relations or working in the legislature, you might want to offer them a stiff drink or a hug, or maybe flowers via GIF emojis. So yeah, we really appreciate dialogue with you all, to answer any questions, to give you space to sort of digest what you heard, and also throw out if there's anything you didn't hear that you want to engage in moving forward, whether that's if you want to participate in policy advocacy, if you want to think about what does it mean to testify or to provide your perspective moving forward. But we are very much looking forward to continuing our partnership together to continue advocating on behalf of students. And I'd say at the end of this legislative session, I'm probably even more motivated and invigorated to apply my energy into ensuring that students have a safe and inclusive environment for them to learn, grow, thrive, and engage in opportunities beyond high school into post-secondary, and having sustainable good quality life. So those are things that are deeply important to me, to CSF, to WSAC, and many of our partners, and all of you here. But how we do that, we're going to be shaking it up a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Yokiko. I wanted to just share a couple other pieces of context, and also answer a couple questions in the chat. There were some questions first around basic needs navigators, which were funded a couple of years ago at our college campuses. That legislation that passed, it was 2 years ago, House Bill 1559, also known as the Post-Secondary Basic Needs Act. That legislation is tied to ongoing funding, and that money was not touched in this budget. So those positions are still funded, I believe, I think at the 0.75 FTE level, if that's in the weeds for anyone here, but my understanding is that funding was not touched. And then similarly for supporting students experiencing homelessness, that funding was not touched either. And Northwest Indian College was the only change or addition to that program. The other two pieces I wanted to share is like, I know that we have said how bad the budget was, how there's no money for anything, right? And I realized that we did not necessarily say like why that's happening. There is not one answer, but to be very brief, our state has seen less revenue collected than we expected, while some of our programs that are caseload forecasted or required to be funded have seen higher participation. One of those programs is the Washington College Grant. Just for context, in the next 2 years, our state had to appropriate an additional $221 million to accommodate all of the new students who are coming onto the Washington College Grant. And that's incredible, right? I mean, it means more students across our state, whether they're coming directly from high school, whether adult learners, whether they've had non-traditional paths to higher education, they are learning about the Washington College Grant. They are accessing benefits that are deserved and that they are eligible for, and they're pursuing a post-secondary credential to hopefully ensure economic mobility and financial security in the future. I mean, it's a really incredible thing to see. And we've seen increased enrollment at many of our institutions across the state as we continue to recover from impacts on the COVID-19 pandemic. But the pressure on the budget comes from lots of places. And in the higher ed space, Washington College Grant is certainly one of those. While we did see some reductions to the awards in kind of ensuing years, many legislators, I will just reaffirm, have expressed a really steadfast commitment to protecting that program as much as possible. It continues to be the most generous and equitable financial aid program in the country of all 50 states. We have been talked about as a national model, right? It is a really amazing intervention that we have in Washington and an investment that we are very fortunate to have for now. But there have just been so many impacts on the budget. I just wanted to share that. Hannah, to your question around advocacy, around lowering tuition rates. Yeah, this is an interesting question. So I can't speak as much to graduate school. I will say that tuition raises have been frozen at our public institutions for a number of years. They can still go up every year by something called the tuition growth factor, which is tied to inflation. I think it's like roughly 3.3% a year. But in terms of a school saying like, we're going to raise our tuition 10% or something, like that is not something that they are currently allowed to do. There was actually a push, we talked earlier in this webinar about Senate Bill 5785. The original iteration of that bill would have limited the Washington College Grant to students in the 0 to roughly 25 MFI range and raise tuition. So way back when, which was like only a month ago, if you can imagine, we've come a really long way since then, and have avoided what I would argue are perhaps even more devastating cuts to the Washington College Grant and other associated programs. So I haven't heard any conversation about lowering tuition. I have heard conversation about raising tuition, to which I just mentioned, but I will say there was very swift opposition to that. There is also some concern among legislators that raising tuition is not a viable avenue for raising state revenue, because there's sort of a line. If you raise revenue too much, programs like the Washington College Grant become more expensive. And on top of that, you start losing students who will drop out or choose not to enroll because they just can't afford the increased tuition. And so if you have more tuition revenue but fewer students, those things may ultimately cancel out. So not at all a silly question. It is a very real debate that had been happening in Olympia, and I think does continue to be discussed at some time. But for the time being, I don't see those changes happening. Ozzy, I know we have just a couple minutes left. If there are any other questions, happy to take those in the chat or to come off mute, but otherwise I'd be happy to turn it back to you for any closing thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Joel and Yokiko, for all that information and getting those questions answered. I did want to kind of drop your guys' contact info here in case anyone wants to get connected with you guys, anyone who's in attendance today. Otherwise, I think that is it. I believe all the questions in the chat were addressed. Yeah, I just want to say thanks again. Huge thank you to Joel and Yokiko for joining us today and sharing these updates with us. Very, very important changes that are coming that are going to have a pretty big impact. So thanks again, and thank you everyone who attended today. And last thing I want to say is just keep an eye on your email for the follow-up to this webinar, which will be a link to our recording of this, as well as those two attachments that Joel had shared previously in the chat. I'll be sure to include those in the email as well. And also keep an eye on your email for any other important announcements and updates from the Washington Passport Network via the Washington Passport Network Navigator newsletter. And if you're not signed up for that, please reach out to me and I will make sure you're added to the list. So again, thank you all for joining us. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day and have a great weekend.